What's up, everybody? In this video, we're going to talk about air gapping your acoustic modules. What is that all about? What are the potential acoustics benefits? If you do choose to do it, exactly how do you do it? And what are the best practices? This video and many more like it are part of a free acoustics course that you can access back at Warp Academy. In that course, we cover everything from how to select your studio monitor speakers, how to orient your room and set up your monitors in the room for the ideal results, how to acoustically test your room using testing software and interpret that data, a variety of different types of room and acoustic treatment plans, how to build your own DIY acoustic modules and place them perfectly in your room using scientific data to be able to optimize things, and then when you're all said and done, how to add that extra final layer using Room EQ to really take your results to the next level. If you want to grab that course, it's entirely free. Click the link below this video and get your access. I'm ready. You ready? Let's get into it. So what is air gapping? Air gapping is simply the process of taking an acoustic module that's made of porous absorption and pulling it away from the wall or whatever reflective room boundary it's against to create an airspace behind it. So why would you use an air gap, and what are the acoustic benefits? Well, I recently did a primer video on porous absorption and how it works. And in that video, I explained how porous absorption becomes less and less effective the closer it is to a hard reflective boundary. If you didn't catch that video, I'll drop a link below, and I would highly recommend you check it out because it's a good foundation to have underneath you as we explore these concepts. But basically, porous absorption works by making the air particles lose some of their energy to friction and heat inside the fibers or the cells of whatever material they're going through. And as they do that, the higher the velocity, the more frictional and heat losses there are. And if the air particles are moving more slowly, they don't lose as much and the absorber is not as effective. Let's use the example of a basketball player shooting a basketball against a wall or a floor. Well, the basketball, when it's shot, has maximum velocity, but then as it hits and approaches that boundary, it compresses and compresses and compresses, and velocity slows to a point where it actually stops, and then it begins to rebound. But at the point where it stops, pressure is the highest. And this is why oftentimes in music studios, you'll see pressure-based treatments used at the room boundary. So the ball rebounds, right? And it loses pressure as velocity increases. And then some distance from that wall or boundary, velocity gets to be the highest. And that happens to be the most effective place to put your porous absorber module. And this corresponds to the quarter wavelength of whatever frequency that is. If you take the example of a acoustic module that's been gapped from the wall by 1 foot or 30 centimeters, that corresponds to, if that's the quarter wavelength, it corresponds to a frequency of 282.5 hertz. So that is the frequency at which that absorber is going to be maximally effective, okay? So you can use these concepts to be able to tweak and tune your room. A final thing to really understand about the frequency quarter wavelength thing is that also every odd multiple of that quarter wavelength frequency corresponding to your gapping distance is also going to have a high velocity point. So it's also going to be very effective. So you can figure out whatever your first order frequency is, and then you can figure out whatever odd multiples there are of that, and it's going to be also maximally effective at all of those frequencies. Let's talk about low frequency absorption. So bass and sub energy are typically the most problematic in a lot of home studios and control rooms. That's just because low frequency energy is very powerful, they're long wavelengths, and it's very difficult to curtail those. Porous absorption, unfortunately, doesn't perform very well in these really low frequencies. It just doesn't do a great job of stopping it. Luckily, air gapping will significantly improve the low frequency absorption coefficients, so it can really help you out here. However, like with most things, it has some limitations to it and some practical considerations. So let's take a look at a real world example. Let's say you've got a bass buildup, a resonance of 60 hertz in your room. You've been able to determine that hypothetically by acoustic testing. Maybe that's because you have overlapping room modes. That's often one of the reasons. So you have this 60 hertz resonance. it's peaking out and it's causing problems in your low frequency response. So you think, hey, let's explore solving this by using an air gap. Well, let's run the numbers. A 60 hertz waveform is going to be about 19 feet long. So the quarter wavelength of that corresponds to be about 4 3/4 foot, so 4 foot 9 inches. So that is the air gap that you would need to create behind your acoustic module to be able to have it be maximally effective at 60 hertz. Now, is it practical or reasonable to lose nearly 5 feet of space in your room? Absolutely not. And in fact, if you had that amount of space, you would get much better results if you filled the cavity behind the front layer of your absorber with pink fluffy fiberglass. So doing an airspace, doing an air gap is not always the best way to go. If you're not limited by the budget that you have and you have the money for more porous absorption, it can often be a much better result to air gap out as far as you can comfortably, aesthetically within the room, and then to fill that airspace with a lighter density material. That's exactly what we did in my control room. We figured we could afford to lose about 3.5 feet. So we did a front layer with a higher density rock wool that was about 32 kilograms per meter cubed. And then we filled the airspace behind with pink fluffy fiberglass. So it was actually no air gap. It was pink fluffy fiberglass all the way to the hard boundary of the isolation shell. And that actually allowed us to really rein in and get amazing results all the way down to 30 hertz. We had really controlled decay times down there. Another good example is this room that I'm in right now. It's a multi-purpose room that my family and I use for watching movies. It's also my office and my fiance's office, but I do a bit of mixing work in here on ultra near field monitors, and I film my YouTube videos in here. So I did want to have as controlled acoustics as I could get. So we used a series of these 5.5 inch thick rock wool floor to ceiling modules, the ones that I teach you how to build in the course. And I did want to air gap them to improve their performance, but I just couldn't afford to lose very much room volume. So I chose to air gap by 6 inches, and that created a really nice effect. There's an airspace behind them. I didn't want to spend the extra money on filling that airspace with fiberglass. I just used the improvement in performance by gapping them out by 6 inches. And if we take a look at the numbers, we have a 0.5 foot 6 inch airspace. It puts the first order frequency where particle velocity is the highest at 565 hertz, and it's going to rein that frequency in most effectively. Next, let's talk about sealing the airspace behind your acoustic modules. This is a pro tip that can increase your results to be even better than just air gapping your modules. So if you are using a smaller wall mounted panel, like a 2 foot by 4 foot one that contains a rock wool bat, you can build a frame. You can seal that frame to your wall using a flexible acoustic sealant or silicone sealant. And you can create a kind of pressure-based treatment where you have a rock wool or some type of porous absorption front layer, you have a sealed airspace behind it, and it's going to create a kind of pseudo pressure membrane effect similar to what you'd get with some type of vibrating panel resonator. I'm not a huge fan of these smaller wall mounted panels. That should be clear by now if you've listened to enough of my videos. I really, really love these floor to ceiling 4 foot by 8 foot rock wool modules. And another advantage about these is that you get the effect of a sealed airspace without having to seal it to your wall. Now how is that possible? So imagine for a sec that you're holding a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of plywood and you're holding it up on its edge, and then you drop it, right? Well, it's going to be trying to push the air out of the way, but the air can't move out of the way fast enough. The edges are too far away, there's too much air. So as that plywood panel approaches the ground, the air is going to have a pressure effect pushing back on it, and it's going to cushion it as it reaches the ground. And that's the same thing that happens with these large floor to ceiling modules that doesn't happen with smaller wall mounted modules. So you get that type of pressure effect as the air is attempting to be pushed out and escape, but it's not able to do that quickly enough, and the edges are far enough away, especially considering that the bottom edge is sitting on the floor and creating a seal. So you get this really wonderful pressure-based low frequency boost when these are placed close to a boundary. And by boost here, I mean a boost in the low frequency absorption coefficient. They're boosting the amount of absorption, not boosting that frequency. So that's another huge advantage, in my opinion, of using these floor to ceiling larger coverage area modules. So should you use an air gap? If you can, I really would recommend it. I think that the improvements in low-end acoustical performance are really substantial. And if you choose to do it, it really just depends on your own situation and the aesthetics and size of your room. So if you can afford to lose a few inches and move your modules into your room, that's great, do it. But if you have the space to lose, if you can go a few feet or even 6 or 7 or 8 inches, and you have the budget to be able to buy some cheaper, lower density material like pink fluffy fiberglass, it can also be an even better move to fill that airspace behind with some lighter density porous absorption. Even though particle velocity is going to be lower there, it is going to provide a great effect. So I think that if you had to choose, money being no object, between having an open airspace or an airspace that is damped and filled with lower density fiberglass, that I would always opt to go with filling it with the lower density fiberglass. That's going to give you a graduated density effect, and it's going to increase your low frequency absorption. So yeah, it really just comes down to your room, the aesthetics of your room, how much space you can lose, and your budget. So at the very least, you can air gap your modules by a bit. That's free, and give it a try. If you're looking for where to go next, definitely watch my series on how to build these floor-to-ceiling rock wool modules, just like the ones in my studio. I think they are really the ultimate DIY modules that you can build, and you can build them for around $250 each, so they're not even that expensive. I dropped a link and card in this video. Click that, and it'll take you right to the series. I'll see you there.